great to have you all here. Thank you for joining us. To all of our friends and Key community that are out there, it's great to have you all. Happy holidays. We can say that now because we're between Thanksgiving and the end of the year. So happy holidays to all. Thanks for being here today. You know, workforce planning, wow. I mean, think about the challenges of aligning talent and recruiting and connecting with strategy, identifying roles, succession planning, empowering managers with workforce data. You know what? The care and feeding of the human resource. I mean, this is what it really is. And there's so much to unpack. And we have a terrific panel today. I'm going to introduce each of our panelists, and I'm going to ask them to say a little bit about what they do and give us a little background. First, I'd like to start with Kristen Ellis. She's the Director of Regulatory, Intergovernmental, and Stakeholder Engagement at the Department of Energy, Office of Environmental Management. Kristen, great to have you today.
Thanks, Patrick. And thanks for inviting me back to this. It's great to see some of the Key family again, and really excited to have this conversation today. And you may be a little confused about why my title doesn't have anything like HR in it, but I'll get to that in a second. But first of all, I wanted to give everyone an introduction to the Office of Environmental Management. I think nobody has heard of us is usually what happens when I'm at a speaking engagement. And we are responsible for the environmental cleanup of the Manhattan Project and kind of Cold War era nuclear governmental research. And so what that accounts to be is the largest environmental remediation in the world. And we spend more than $7 billion a year on this mission, which puts us at the number 3 for the federal government's liabilities. And again, no one's heard of us. And so that's part of the challenge for recruiting. And but, you know, after the Social Security and Medicare, then there's us, and we've got 50 more years plus of work to do all across the country. And that work out in the country is done by contract employees and additionally by federal employees. But they're at very diverse and a lot of rural geographic locations on purpose. You know, when the government was citing these locations back in World War II, they were looking for secrecy. So that's part of the challenge too. It's not like we can go to city centers like Chicago to, you know, get the next best talent to come work in Carlsbad, New Mexico, or Piketon, Ohio, and a lot of these places that people have never heard of. So that's one of our challenges, and that's what makes it really interesting for us. And then, you know, I'll just share some quick statistics about our federal workforce, and then, you know, looking forward to the conversation today. We have about 1,200 employees across the country, some in DC headquarters and some all across the country. But we have authorization to be at 1,400 employees. So we are out of the gate, we've got 200 vacancies. And I'm sure our numbers on, you know, likely people who can retire at any time are similar to, you know, my other colleagues here. It's hovering at about 25% and only going up over the next couple of years. But one last statistic I'll share about our federal workforce. Of those 1,200 positions, we have 15 people under the age of 30. And that's just not a sustainable number. And it's a shocking statistic every time I share that. So that's how we're that's the portfolio we have. But, you know, it's an incredibly challenging and rewarding mission. And I wanted to come here today to, you know, put the word out for all of the Key alumni. You know, if you want a mission that's really compelling and covers all sorts of different jobs, that's us. And really looking forward to talking more about that with the group today.
Look at you recruiting. I love it. Thank you, Kristen. Very, very helpful. And that is a staggering statistic. My goodness. Also have with us today, Kara Casales, who is the Chief Workforce Planning and Analysis Branch at the Office of Workforce Effectiveness and Resources at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. Kara, welcome. Tell us a little bit about what you do, what's going on.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I am thrilled to be here today. So I just learned a lot, Kristen, about your agency and your office in particular, some things I didn't know. Thanks for sharing that. I'll share relatedly that just about 3 years ago, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases was not necessarily a household acronym that people knew well. And that really changed with COVID, didn't it? So Dr. Anthony Fauci is the director of our institute, and many of you on this call have already heard in the news that he has announced his separation from the federal government effective the end of this calendar year. So it is a fascinating time to be overseeing succession planning in a federal agency, and this one in particular. And in addition to Dr. Fauci, we have 70+% of our senior executive leaders at our IC. IC is code for Institute and Center. There are 27 at the NIH. The NIAID is the second largest. So in our institute alone, 70% of our senior executive leaders are either retirement eligible right now or have been for 5 or more years. So we have a staggering Great Resignation already in the works. It feels a lot like a domino board right now, one falling after another. And we've done some things to prepare, and we've learned a lot as well about what we will do going forward. We also oversee in the branch that I head up the engagement suite. So succession planning in our approach is very connected to engagement, and then to historical or theoretical workforce planning as a broader portfolio of considerations as well. So I'll touch on a few of those pieces today.
Wonderful, Kara. Thank you and welcome. Thank you for joining us. And last but certainly not least, our good friend Russell Robinson. Russell is the Senior Advisor for Training and Engagement at the Program Support Center at Health and Human Services. Russell, tell us a little bit about what's happening, and welcome, my friend.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity to be here. Shout out to Key and American University, and you, Patrick, our DJ in the background, Jennifer Tether on the ones and twos. I'm here with Kristen and my HHS colleague, Kara. I bring greetings to you from the Program Support Center. Well, we're not sexy like NIH and the work Kristen's doing. We're a shared service provider within HHS. We provide about 450 employees, give or take. Little low on those under 30 also. We provide shared services throughout the government, such as EAP, work life, grants, e-travel, real estate. And my role is much more from the corporate standpoint. It's developing and determining how to deliver training to our 450 employees. I'm also the employee engagement guy, so putting together the action plan for employee engagement, and then somehow the work we're doing for diversity and inclusion has kind of come under my realm. So I think this is truly a fascinating time with the conversation on succession planning, the Great Resignation. We just finished our training plan for 2023, and a lot of our supervisors talked about, while they didn't specifically say succession planning, they talked about resource management and workforce planning. And I look at that as not as much the Great Resignation, but from a talent management, this huge opportunity to find ways to bring talent under 30 into the federal government. So I'm excited to be here. And thanks, Patrick. I've only been asking to be part of Fed Talks for about 4 years now. So better late than never.
You're very welcome, Russell. It's good to see you. You know, it's funny you mentioned 4 years, Russell. I'm thinking 4 years ago and to the panel 4 or 5 years ago, we would have been having a totally different conversation right now than what we're going to have today. So very excited to hear from everyone. I'm going to go ahead and start by kicking off with Kara and kind of posing the question about the shifts that we've seen in the workforce planning space. Kara, how's it changed? What are you witnessing?
Yeah, so to set the stage with just the term workforce planning in general. So I don't know how many of you experienced this at the Thanksgiving lunch or dinner table, but when you have a relative who says, oh, what do you do? Are you in HR? Well, kind of. Workforce planning is nuanced though. And so when trying to explain this to relatives that don't have a background in business or in human capital or in human resources or any of these related fields, I say sometimes that I try to teach colleagues how to be time travelers. And by that, I mean, workforce planning is working in all 3 dimensions of time: past, present, and future. Future being the realm of time, I suppose, that most people naturally think about when they think about planning. So we think of plan, strategy, and future, often seeing them as interchangeable. We have a workforce plan, we have a strategy, we're thinking about the future. So predominantly knowing that we're all more used to usually the concept of what's happening in the future with our workforce, how will we get there? What shifts I'm seeing now is more awareness about not only what workforce planning is, because as the Great Resignation finally is coming to pass, the silver tsunami in the government was threatened for decades, and it didn't really hit until about yesterday, right about now. And so now people are not only starting to understand what workforce planning is in terms of what do you have now, what do you need in the future, what's the gap, how will you get there in very simplified terms, people are also starting to see what complementary services are connected to workforce planning and that really have business and an important role in being considered in the workforce planning discussion, and how you resource that with your practitioners, how you train them, how you recruit them, how you borrow them maybe. So what's happening now is, in the past, the use of data that happened in the past, because a data point, it's now in the past, it existed, it's not right now, it's then. It using that to inform both the present and the future to help us scenario plan smarter. So what are the most likely things that we see happening? Best case, worst case, most likely case, so that we're not spending time now trying to boil the ocean, but we're being smarter about, let's just plan for these two possible outcomes and really spend the preponderance of our attention there. So I would say more rapid prototyping, not trying to solve every problem, but focusing and prioritizing the 1 to 3 problems we really feel are the most logical to prepare for, that present the most possible risk, and then iterating. So pushing ourselves into a growth mindset to just try a few things and not assume that we can engineer the best answer, but try it. If it fails, okay, the building didn't burn down, no one got hurt, maybe a few eyebrows were raised, but let's scrap that. Let's try something different. Let's refine it. So that comes to the way we are delivering services to our customers, consulting with our customers, rather than waiting for a fully cooked suite of perfect, tied with a bow services and approaches, because oftentimes we find by the time you're finished with that, it's become overcome by events, OBE, right? That acronym. It's no longer pertinent or relevant. And involving our customers in that rapid prototyping by vetting and updating tools with their input and contributions. So those are 2 big shifts. I've got 2 more, not new, but the human element. So shifting the attention of the way we conduct succession planning, the way we package it, market it, talk about it, try to sell the merits of it to those who are reluctant, because if you haven't experienced it yet, it is only a matter of time until you hear a leader say, I don't have time for any of that, we'll just figure it out, right? Shifting of attention to the employee's needs and rebalancing in that direction. So employee engagement, I talked about it when I first introduced myself. That is becoming a very prominent connection to succession. In particular, stay interviews, fancy label for checking in and seeing how someone that works with you or reports to you, usually in the most formal context, how do they feel? How is their relationship to the work? Do they want to give discretionary effort? Do they want to bring their best every day? Or do they need a minute? Do they need some space? Do they need some re-energizing in their role? Do they need to find a connection? Do they need help for that? And for us, that's radically reapproaching workforce planning. The 4th and final that I'll share, and then I'll give up the mic because I know it's a lot of talking, is less of a focus on competencies. So I don't know about those on the call and my colleagues here, but I would say even about 5 years ago, there was much more of an emphasis on using competencies as an overlay for workforce planning and trying to have competency models architected and tested and validated, and the proficiencies of every single employee within a certain role, family, job function, whatever label you use for in your agency. That's a lot of work and it's really hard. And so I think it's been very smart to that first shift I talked to you about, just logic and smartness, moving away from that a bit more. And instead of trying to come up with global frameworks for everything, tailoring our focus to the point of most urgency, need, aligned to where we see the risk as being highest for something to really come to pass. So those are the four to answer that question to start off with.
You know, Kara, it sounds like almost a rediscovery, or maybe it's a discovery of this field of the profession of planning. I mean, is that what you're seeing? Because it sounds like it to me.
Absolutely. I think people used to not really listen when you talked about what your role was in workforce planning and why it mattered, and they kind of tuned it out. And now that people are seeing their key staff, these employees, that's how work gets done, is the people and these talents that are walking away, some of whom they expected and some of whom they never saw coming. So you've got a big scope there. Now people are really starting to pay attention, and I'm sure all of our phones are ringing and our inboxes are filling up with more of a demand for services, particularly on the succession planning side. For decades, we've been trying to encourage more proactive investment in succession and candidate readiness. And people are finally starting to see that that would have been a great idea. And some of them did it, and some of them didn't. And so now we'll work with wherever people are. And being able to scale that as part of this working smarter, and not globally all the time, but addressing the point of need and triaging, getting there quickly.
Yeah, thank you, Kara. And I'm wondering for Kristen and Russell, are you all seeing similar trends that changes in that workforce planning space in your areas as well, Kristen?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And back to my original thought about how my title does not have HR in it. And, my scope is regulatory and stakeholder and intergovernmental. And, and for my office, we've come to realize that we need to it takes a village to solve some of these issues. And I think COVID was a wake-up call for us that we need to start thinking about it in a bunch of new different ways. And, I'm sure everyone complains about how long it takes to get somebody through the USA jobs process. And so we're trying to, tackle new ways to do that, shorten the process, get the word out in other, ways that are using social media a little better than, certainly we're never going to be able to compete with the companies that let you apply for a job using TikTok, but, we're trying to do something there. And then also, because we're so diversified across the country, and the vast majority of our work scope is done by contractors, so I gave you the picture of our federal work scope, but, also from the contractors, to get the jobs we need filled, we need local officials helping us, state officials helping us, and so I think what we're seeing is a lot more openness to new ideas. So I think the time is right to be looking at, all of these new creative solutions, and, noticing how people are responding to flexibilities that maybe another agency is offering that my agency isn't. People are paying attention and making decisions that way. So I really think it's one of those change management opportunities that are, certainly once in a decade. But we'll be looking back in this a few years from now and being like, oh, look at how everything has changed.
No doubt about it. And there's a question that just came in here. It says, can you elaborate on point of urgency? What does that look like?
Was that to me? I don't remember saying point of urgency.
Kara, did you say point of urgency?
It might have been me. So it's tailoring your response to a request for service to the point of need. And so when scoping how we will perform our work and support our institute, given the limited resources we have, it's prioritizing where the urgency is the highest. So by point of urgency, it means who has the most pressing need, where is the risk greatest that we will be vulnerable with a departure of a key position. And that's probably where we need to start, or at least really protect a meaty chunk of time to make sure that some thoughtful, thorough investment in succession happens for those.
Yeah, it makes sense, Kara. Thank you. And Kristen, back to your comments. I'm curious what you think about, in this new world, trying to figure out ways to handle these challenges in a remote world, or how are those really informing the decisions that we're making?
Yeah, it's a big topic of discussion in our agency, and I'm sure everywhere. So for some of our work scope, it's not one answer fits all. if we have folks who work at a headquarters office building, their daily activities are going to be different than someone who's out at one of our sites, maybe doing a nuclear safety job. So obviously, we can't approach this as there can only be one answer. And I think the pandemic showed that, we have flexibilities, we have different ways to approach this. And I think we're going to have to be cognizant moving forward if we want to move the needle on our, under 30 numbers. What we're hearing loud and clear from everywhere is that people want flexibilities and they want different options. So that's how we're sort of thinking about it right now. And I think, what we've seen also during the pandemic, as again, I mentioned the stakeholder engagement portion, for external folks who are interested in our program, we had huge numbers of participation through, virtual means during the pandemic. And so I think there's lessons to be learned from how we did some business there, how we engage with customers that we can take into the future. I wouldn't say that we've solved it or figured it out or, think that we've mastered remote work by any means, but I was also hopeful to hear that maybe some of my colleagues on this call, found some silver bullets for us, but it's definitely still a work in progress. And I think everyone's been kind of surprised how long it's taken us to still continue to think over all these things. But I don't think we're, I don't think January 1 is going to mean we've got it all figured out.
Well, thank you, Kristen. And I'd like to stay on that remote work topic for just a second to see, Russell, do you have any comments on that from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think Kara mentioned something that was very important here. And that is you really have to go above the Great Resignation and succession planning and really look at the future of work. Like, what is the relationship that we are going to have with work? As it relates to remote work, I think what I'm finding, especially looking through the prism of training and development, is if you look at where we are right now, and I don't think I mentioned in the beginning, so I'm an adjunct at Key. So I teach feds 3 classes: reflective leadership, authentic leadership, and achieving results through others. And when I talk to this middle management cadre, 13s up to SESs here at PSC, everybody's overwhelmed. Everybody has mental health challenge. There's not everyone, but there have been mental health issues, wellness issues, well-being issues. And what that really gets to is this need for connection. So no matter what an agency's plan is for the return to work, it's been a bell curve. At one tail, everybody comes in. At the other tail, everybody's virtual. The bell in the middle is some combo 2, 3, 3, 2, 4, 1. Managers have to understand that's going to impact people on your staff differently. There are people who are going to want the connection of the office. We've had people retire because they're going to miss the connection only being in 2 days a week. We've had employees who started during COVID who never felt the connection coming into the office. And I think it really takes this different leadership mindset in regards to how are we able to connect with our employees, while at the same time understanding this middle management to upper management, while it being everybody. People are burned out. People are impacted by COVID. That's impacting them at an individual level. And then they've got this group of people under our span of control. This future of work, this whole conversation is a challenge and a blessing. So what we really have to do is we have to stop and look at this data that says over the past 3 years, over 5 million people have died. And that ripples and has ripples into all aspects of society. And if you're one of those who've been impacted and you've lost a loved one or you've lost somebody close, that's a different conversation. If you're not, and this goes to my reflective leadership class, if you haven't looked at the past 3 years and reflected on something or come up with something different, you've missed this huge opportunity. And what it does to reflect on what your purpose is. What does work mean to you? Being the engagement person, I'm at the point where I think work can be transactional and people can have value and be engaged. And that's asking a lot of people like myself, Kara, Kristen. That's asking a lot of Key. Although if you look at the Key program, Key was kind of built for this, prepared for these complex and chaotic moments where the necessary leadership skills have changed. Like if you're hiring branch chiefs and division chiefs and DASs primarily based on their technical expertise, your succession planning has got to be tight because you're going to be missing the mark for what people are looking for. Last piece, SHRM came out with a report that said before COVID, 50 remote workers were 50% less likely to get promotions. That changes how you lead in this flexible work setting. From a training standpoint, it's been a blessing for me because I've taken the aspect of we're in DC, Program Support Center is now a regional agency. My West Coast employees love that we don't start training before 7 a.m. West Coast time. They were tired of getting up at 5 a.m. So there's a blessing in this, there's a challenge in this, but I think we really as government have to stop and focus really on where we are and understand, like, if you asked me 4 or 5 months ago, I'd say PSC is doing great at this return to work. But right now, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. I think we're in phase 4 of maybe 22 phases. And you work with what you work with. And we've got to get we got to get out of the government mindset that it's got to be perfect. And we got to be like Microsoft and Apple. It's like, we're going to do the best we can. And if stuff's changed, we'll put out an update patch and we'll keep moving. But yeah, this idea that we're at a low level and everybody's getting it right, I don't think we know. And we've got a recession coming. So that, and at some point, student loan payments will have to happen. That'll cause another pivot or another shift. And I need to stop because Patrick knows I can get rolling on this. And you got to play music at the Grammys to get me shut up.
You're doing great, Russell. Bureaucracies are not designed for that easygoing kind of see where we're going to get to and be malleable. And that's just not the way bureaucracies are set up. So that does create a challenge. Kara, I want to give you a chance to comment on this remote and virtual work aspect. How is it looking from your standpoint?
Yeah, so Russell, you just covered some really important things. We, in the branch that I oversee, we were really stable for 6 years. We didn't have any turnover. And then all of a sudden, half of our branch left in the same 3-week period. And that was a really big hit. And it was predominantly folks who had onboarded during the pandemic who never made connection. And so a huge learning uncovered in exit and transition interviews with those staff where we never really clicked and connected as well as we needed to with our colleagues here. And so that was a huge humbling learning moment for me, and things have really shifted now. And what we are doing in our IC, our institute now, is harnessing the strength of the supervisors as a community and imploring them to invest in intentional connection differently than they ever have before. And not assuming that the preferences that they gathered from their staff in past stay interviews are still the reigning preferences held today, that continuous check-ins must happen because people are going to have differing epiphanies and will be reassessing work and life priorities more frequently now because more changes, more disruptions are happening more frequently now than they did in the past. And so one of the things that we are trying is, I don't know how many here are fans of Marvel comic universe, but the character Heimdall in Thor, he's like the gatekeeper, to let you into that world. So supervisors really have this tremendous call to service. When we joined federal service, we all took an oath of public service. So we're connected to that inherently, but then the supervisor level is an elevation of that. What a tremendous opportunity and challenge supervisors have. They are the conduit and the steward of the relationship between the employee and the agency. It's their responsibility. It's the employee's responsibility too, but it's a lot the supervisor. So we're trying something new. It's a supervisors summit. to get all the supervisors to get together, to signal to them that they are an in-group and they can support each other and they can reach across aisles, silos, divisions, offices, sections, whatever you want to call those organizational units, in a way they haven't really been invited to do before, to talk about employee management challenges, tips for success. That's like one small piece, but the other piece is equipping them with some proactive engagement and retention tools and questionnaires, interview guides, meeting protocols of sorts, whatever you want to call it, to encourage more frequent conversations and to encourage setting up more intentional connections. Some of your staff are local, but come in less frequently. Some are coming in every day. So a true hybrid workforce. Some now live in Texas and they used to live here in Bethesda. Whatever that composition looks like for you, figure out how to build community more intentionally, because people need that. It's not forced, but it's definitely a more manual and less organic process than it used to be when people could bump into each other in the office. Now you have to manually create some conditions with intention to help people broker those connections, because to Russell's point about some really disrupting life events that people have experienced, people need connection at work. There's a loneliness epidemic. That's not a new thing either, but that's really hitting a lot of people across industry. It's not just the federal government, but we're hearing from our exit data that's really felt in federal separations as reasons for leaving. So long-winded answer to your question, Patrick, but there you go. Intentional connection.
No, thank you. The lonely. Oh, go ahead, Russ, please.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on what Kara said. And I'm at work at HHS now. So let me be clear. I'm about to go off script and a drone could take me out at any second. But I think when
those HHS drones are dangerous, Russ. We know they're out there. Ooh.
They don't. I had hair before the drone got me last time. I moved out of the way. But I think when we focused on the return to work, and I was on the survey committee, and I get where we were. Like, we're HHS, we're everything with the pandemic. We've got to embody what this return to work is. And we really grounded this return to work in Maslow. Are our employees safe? Do they have masks? Or do we have a proper spacing? Here's what happens if you test positive. We also worked to focus on commute times. What we missed was that the office now has to be this social lubricant. And we were getting employees who were like, I'm coming in 2 days a week to spend all my time on Zoom. And it goes what Kara says, like, now we need supervisors who know how to connect. And I use know-how because, there's this belief that supervisors automatically have the skill set to do it, or they care. And for all we're doing, there are people, the biggest hindrance to everything we're talking about with connection is that there are people who don't care. There are supervisors and leaders who are more comfortable in a world where they have answers and don't have to be vulnerable, as opposed to asking questions or stating, here's how I'm impacted. But that's where I said, you've got to have this patch, and you have to create these cultures where you can course correct over the next, the next 18 of the remaining 18 of the 22 phases.
Yeah, thank you, Russ. I want to go back to, Kristen, you started this with this whole thing about the virtual, and there's a question in the chat. I'd love to hear what you think about this. The question is the virtual work, is it here to stay? It's valued by a lot of organizations right now. Is it here to stay, or is it more dependent on the political climate? What are your thoughts?
So I think that I think it's like a pendulum, like it'll swing some ways, but I think that, there's been such a positive response to, even if it's not a 100% solution, it sure works 80% of the time. So we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of situation. Boy, that was lots of different metaphors in that sentences there.
Those are really good.
But I think it's, we've shown that it works. And I think, for some of my employees are remote employees, and I've been in federal government long enough to know things like that are kind of hard to turn back the other way. Certainly, the number of days that you're teleworking, I could see some change in that based on kind of political wins. But I also think that even though it hasn't been that long, we have enough data to show that, if there are agencies that are offering 100% remote and they're getting exhaustive responses to job applications and fantastic candidates, then we're going to lose our people to those agencies. And I think at some point, even if we are a little slow and cumbersome, we'll have to make some adjustments to supply and demand of who we're getting in our workforce. And, back to some of the points that Russell just made, I wanted to, if sometimes it feels overwhelming to take on all of these future of work things, but really, they're just a different flavor of leadership question. And, how you think about introverted employees and extroverted employees are very applicable in the post-COVID reality. How you build a successful team, how you approach generational differences, because I do think there are some generational tendencies that kind of color the conversation about, are you comfortable with remote or are you comfortable not with remote? And I also think if you want to build a successful team and you've got people from different perspectives, then that's how you're going to be the most successful. And so I think the onus is on the leaders and the managers to figure it out. We are kind of the front line of where this stuff is happening. But I'm more than willing to advocate for my team if it's the best thing for my team, but I don't think there's going to be one solution, and I'm not going to, even within our agency offices, they're doing it a variety of different ways. So it is very hard to predict. And I know that's a little bit of a cop out, but.
Not at all. It's a great answer. Russ, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on one thing Kristen said, especially when you talk about trying to recruit this younger group. Other agencies, let me do a little location bias in DC. Other agencies aren't our only competition. These government contractors that are providing remote work are our competition. Some of our government contractors started to lose their staff to Amazon, with Amazon coming to town, and we've lost a couple of employees to Amazon. So it really takes this aspect of, if our goal is to make government more appealing to the millennials and Gen Zs, we have to understand that they have other options beyond the government. And how do we do our workforce planning where we can make government appealing, or also understand they may not be coming to government for 30 years. And maybe they want to come in for 2 or 3 years and then cycle out and then become boomerang employees and cycle in. We have a supply chain office up in Perryville, Maryland. I would love if I could wave a magic wand where we create an internship where our people go and spend time at Amazon, and Amazon employees come and spend time here. And then you're becoming this true talent management aspect. So I just want to say our competition is not just other federal agencies right now.
Yeah, fair point, Russell. And I'm hearing from all of you, and Carrie, you mentioned the loneliness epidemic, which, the latest research on this has shown that about 61% of our nation is consistently lonely, and it's a horrible chronic. In fact, there was a story on it just a couple of days ago on one of the morning shows. We know that the younger generation, that the heavy social media users, we know the two younger generations are the two most lonely generations. The Zs and the millennials are lonelier than the other generations, and of those, we know that the heavy social media users are 73% more likely to be lonely. So we've got this epidemic of loneliness out there. We've got, Russ, you touched on some of the issues of COVID. We've all talked about COVID. There's social justice matters, partisan politics, which has just been a nightmare, I think, in our nation for so many years now. And with all of this noise, we still need the involvement of leaders, for things like continuity of workforce and so forth. Kara, what about your thoughts on that? How do you get involvement from leaders for the matters that you all are talking about that are so important with everything that's going on? And that's not even the mission work. We're not even talking about that. So what's the secret for that?
Yeah, so I won't suggest that I have all the best answers and perfect answers, but one idea was one I shared with you in the previous answer about kicking off this rapid prototype. We're trying this supervisor summit to reinforce roles and responsibilities in all aspects, and the loneliness conversation, the social justice conversation. We stay away from all things partisan at the NIH, but we're talking about the strife, the disruptions that people are experiencing for sure. I think the other one of the biggest things that is my go-to for addressing how you get leaders to buy into anything is data. Data speak volumes. And so we've been moving a lot of what used to be annual reports that were manual, that were intensive, heavy workload into dashboards. And when leaders have access to look at some of the separation data, some of the engagement data, in particular from FEVS, but other sources too. We're doing quick polls now for our institute to gauge how well some of our efforts to remediate or address concerns that were signaled in the FEVS. How are they landing? Are people aware of what's available to them? So those dashboards have been making data more easily consumed by an audience that we used to just have to push out a report and it would hit maybe not at the perfect time because it would be once or twice a year. And now they can refresh that every week and see what separation is looking like and how their key talent and their stars, whether they're leaving and leaving them with gaping holes in their capabilities and their ability to deliver on the mission. And I do think that pushing these, we have transition interviews in place for anyone who is identified as holding a key position. And the intel, I'll call it, that comes out of those is gold, just to hear why people have chosen to join a competitor, whether it's Amazon or whether it's another agency that's offering a flexibility that they needed, or that's offering a guaranteed one day in the office where everyone gets together, because they have, in many places, the NIH, it's 100% remote. They don't have any connection built in. So those conversations are yielding very important qualitative data that are helping inform, when you roll up the themes analysis, are helping inform some quite important action that our senior most leaders are really buying into now. When you see the numbers, when you see that you're trying to bail out the Titanic with a Dixie cup, I'm gonna add an analogy too there, Kristen, metaphor, then people are gonna take action based on numbers and qualitative themes too.
Yeah,
Data.
Thank you, Kara. Kristen, what about on your side? How do you encourage involvement of leaders and all the stuff that you're trying to get done?
Well, we can't do anything without everyone involved. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's exciting to be enlisting the help of other partners besides just our current manager workforce. Our activities are very impactful in the communities that we are in. And I kind of mentioned before, for the history of our program, we were kind of the company town for many places, during, the Cold War and whatnot. And so, they're used to us being around, and of course they're invested in our jobs and our activities. So in some ways, it's really neat that we have some additional resources beyond some of my federal partners here. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning of our talk, since we're only a small portion of the workforce that's involved, we do get to tap into some other kind of resources with our contractor corporate partners, and we've been working kind of with them as well about what are some solutions that we can share among ourselves, because they're among themselves facing the same challenges. Oftentimes at our sites, they'll be poaching employees from each other. So we're all invested in getting more quality employees into the pipeline, because we can't be successful without more bodies, and the solution is not stealing from Peter to pay Paul, another metaphor in there. So again, I'll reiterate that we haven't found all the solutions yet, but I think working more closely with our local communities and hearing on the ground what the needs are, and actually taking the time to, as Kara said, have the data to back it up. We're putting a lot more activity into building out our job projection needs from the 1 to 5 year basis at our sites. And that was in response to, our local governments were asking, well, we don't have a good picture of, what kind of jobs are you hiring over the next 5 years? What kind of people do you need? And so that's kind of a short-term response, but longer term, we're trying to think more proactively too about if we're trying to get people into the nuclear field in our country, we don't just need nuclear people. We need groundwater experts, engineers, scientists, and then all of the other key government features that everyone else has: cyber, HR, general counsel, project management, all of the above. But if we're trying to get the next generation of workers, then we're targeting middle school students to kind of educate them about our work. And I would encourage the other folks too. I mean, I would say when I joined government service, I was on the younger end of people who were still thinking about government as a career. And like others have said, even if we get people for 2 to 3 years, what we found in our office is once we get them, they'll stay and they find the mission very encouraging. But we've got to get them. We've got to get them over some hump of getting bought into the mission. And I've talked to some other DOE colleagues at our national labs, because we have the 17 national labs, and we have the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, which is near our site in Washington, and they set up a satellite office in Seattle. And they're between, I think it's Microsoft and Amazon. And they have been successful in recruiting some folks to come work for the national lab under the guise of, the mission, the national security mission, that, come work for your country. And instead of working 18 hours a day, trying to get somebody's slippers to them faster, 4 hours faster. And so there are little pockets of things that I think people are trying and experimenting with some ideas on things, and doing that and replicating that is going to be key. We can't, as I've said before, can't have one solution. We've got to try 20 different things and see what sticks.
Absolutely. Russ, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it really goes back to leaders who know how to connect. So a big thing of what we do at PSC is how do we create this voice culture? This voice culture is the baseline for the diversity and inclusion work we do. It's the baseline for the engagement work we do. How do we create this culture where if you're feeling lonely, if you're feeling burnt out, if you're not feeling valued, or you are feeling all of those things, you can express those to your supervisor. I'm going to disagree with Kara. I mean, I'm going to agree that we are not partisan, but if you ask people from a social justice standpoint, when we talk to our Asian employees about were they impacted by the massage parlor shootings, they would say yes. Would I think that that we don't have federal employees who weren't impacted by Roe v. Wade or some of these mass shootings? I'd say they are. And what I articulate to our supervisors is it's not our job to tell people what's right and wrong. Like I have conversations with a couple employees who are all lives matter, and I'm Black Lives Matter. My goal isn't to say I'm right and you're wrong. My goal is to create a forum where we can understand each other's perspectives, because when you do that, then you can tackle everything. And what we found, because I said we grounded our diversity work in emotional and in voice culture, is that what our employee resource group, that we fund an employee resource group for diversity because of the Trump stuff. Is more about having difficult conversations. But what they went to our leadership and said was, we need more socially aware leaders. So what we ended up doing was we did EQI assessments for all of our supervisors, 450 employees. So it's very scalable, because at the end of the day, the leaders we need to have in the government, they need to be strategic. They need to be able to see, as Kara said, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. They need to be able to provide role and job clarity. They need to be able to understand change management and how to seek out different perspectives. They need to be agile. They need to know how to manage stress. They need to know how, when in their life, when the lights go out or they're in darkness or the rain comes, they can make it through. But they know how to connect with people. And when you do that, then you'll be able to empower your employees, you'll be able to empower your customer, and you'll be able to meet agency missions. So creating a voice culture and finding a way to do emotionally intelligent leaders, I could do it from a training standpoint. If I had another magic wand and we could be more intentional about bringing it into the hiring process and asking more EI questions during the interview process to understand who's strong at it, who would be good for us, but we may need to work, or who may not be a fit. And then we look at how they align with our organizational values. Then we look at technical skills. Then we're going to have some impact.
You know, Russ, what you're describing sounds to me like something that would be very beneficial for just the way that we communicate across the organization with these various generations. I mean, we started early on in this conversation. One of the first things that was brought up, it actually caught me by surprise a little bit, was this issue of the various generations and the communication across those generations. I love, Carrie, you mentioned something that you all do. I can't remember. I wrote down, it said, less focus on competencies. And then you talked about a kind of a pop-in meeting or a check-in like midway through. What did you call those?
Day interviews.
Like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it. But just the intentional act, the acts of doing those things to reaching out. And I think it is complicated. I mean, we do have a nation that's very, very fearful. The Chapman Fear Index, which comes out every year from Chapman University in California, identifies Americans' top fears. The number one fear for the last 5 consecutive years has been corrupt government. That's on our mind, right? We know that we mentioned the issues of loneliness and anxiety, as well, the social justice issues that we see as a nation and the partisan politics, which I wrote an article not long ago that said, look, stop holding our federal and our public service leaders accountable at a higher level, because they are impacted by this just as much as everybody else. There needs to be some sort of arena for them to be able to have these conversations. Everybody understands our role as public servants and the fact that we serve the politicals that are in power. That's exactly what we're here to do. But that doesn't mean that we're not feeling the stress of a nation that's torn apart. And those conversations really have to happen, without doubt. I love the point you all are making. Let me shift just quickly, if I could, to a question about, I'm curious about like maybe quick hit tools. If for example, succession plans. So, Kristen mentioned that you've got only 15 people under the age of 30 in a very, very large group. Carrie, you mentioned that 70% retirement eligible. It's just crazy to me. If organizations, if the people out there that are in the here with us today don't have a succession plan and they're working, what are some of the things that they could think about? Carrie, what are some of the tools they could use to be able to deal with that and be ready for it?
Yeah, so the first two that come to mind for us are starting with identifying where your key positions exist in the organization. So if you don't already have an inventory of where your key positions reside, start there. And you can put it into tiers so that you can scale it based on how much time you have to devote to the effort. But start with your senior most executive, the top leaders, right? And then in the next tier, I'd say would be the core line of business related. So for us, we would call them scientific leaders because that's the direct mission. But in other agencies, that might be, the nuclear engineer, what have you, Kristen. And in Russell, it might be your counselors. I don't know. So it's the line leaders then. And then in the third tier, it would be the indirect or the administrative support leaders. So those are 3 levels of just leaders. And then in the fourth category, we go to mission essential, hard to fill standalone positions. So exceptionally challenging to recruit. They're not necessarily formal leaders. Some of them are supervisors, but they are, maybe 1 or only 2 deep in a certain function or specialty, or they are just radically challenging to source the talent to fill that niche role. So that's one place to start, just to assess how deep your bench is. And it also is a very telling exercise for how many opportunities there are that you can better market, publicize, and prepare your entire workforce as a candidate pool, because your entire workforce is a candidate pool, in addition to the field, which is all the people you haven't recruited yet who could come to be part of your formal direct candidate pool. So that's step 1, is your key position identification. Step 2, I'd say tool-wise, would be using interview guides in a succession focus. So we have a transition planning interview guide. It's a questionnaire of about 20 questions that we offer to every separating employee once they announce, I'm leaving on X day. So on the federal side, for those of us who are federal employees, Paperwork Reduction Act, once they're out the door, you can't talk to them anymore because they are the American public, can't burden them, right? So they have to still be here. So you have to get to them before their last day, officially, as part of federal service. but talking to them about their unique experiences, their advice for future folks who may hold this position, projects they feel would be so contributive to the mission that they never quite got to. Immediate tips for people who are coming in their first month that they think would really serve them well to be successful early on. That's the transition planning interview guide. And then we have a leadership version of that for those who are in formal leadership roles before they separate. That is, again, about legacy. What legacy do you want to leave? What advice would you want to impart for the workforce who will still be here behind you and who will be coming in the future that you don't know yet? Key stakeholders that are critical for success, developmental activities that they suggest that they see gaps in their own division or unit or section right now. Where do they identify some risks, some deficiencies in skill level and capability? Where do they identify opportunities for people to grow that they recommend the organization invest proactively and quickly on the heels of that departure? So those have been the most helpful immediate tools to start with. And then I think that just wanted to touch on the continuity of workforce piece too, encouraging leaders to model that they are committed to planning for their own eventual retirement, separation, asking them to provide testimony to, I completed that transition interview with Kara's group. I sat down and talked to them about my advice, about my legacy, about the projects that I think should be done that I didn't make it to. And it was so valuable. And I encourage all of my fellow leaders who are thinking about leaving to really sit down and commit to doing that too. And it doesn't have to be meeting time. We can send you a questionnaire and you can fill it out. And then you can keep that as a document that's referenceable for your organization after you leave. We never have to see it in my office. I just want to make sure that that organization is set up for success when you go. So that's where I'd start.
Definitely. I mean, the organizational, I mean, that's the organizational memory. I mean, that's right. That's what builds the culture. Kristen, what about on your side? Anything out there that you can think of in terms of tips for transition if you don't have something in place?
Sure. And as this is a great question for me, not as an HR expert, but as a hiring manager. And I would really encourage people to invest time at the very beginning of the hiring process to understand the various flexibilities. We've been recently made aware that, we have new authorities that I didn't realize, like we can bring someone on board if we know someone is retiring and they can be there together at the same time. That wasn't something that we always had as a flexibility. And additionally, there's some other kind of direct hire authorities that we're taking advantage of that we haven't before. And so really, I would just encourage people to look at the whole gamut. At Department of Energy, some of our other offices have been really successful at hiring people out of a graduate fellows program. And, they'll have them on board for 2 years as a graduate fellow. And then for the agency, it gives them 2 years of exposure to this individual employee where they don't have to commit to them. But then at the end, if it's a good fit, then they already know what they're getting and they're able to hit the ground running. And one of our offices has been really successful there, and we're trying to replicate that program. Another thing I'm pretty excited about that we're working on, we had a minority serving institution program, and it was functioning at about the $5 or $6 million level, not billions. Sorry, we do have billions, but not on that. But we were able to this year scale that up to the $50 million level. And so again, a little early to have all the data there, but for us, it's a great opportunity to, build the next generation, have a diversity of candidates that maybe did not have exposure to our program, because again, as I've said, the awareness levels of our mission are very low. But then kind of as a third thing to the geography issue we have, if we're catching students from a school in Mississippi who have no knowledge of our site in Washington, but hey, we've caught, great students in the fields that we need, and we're kind of matchmaking, and it's not stealing from an existing employee that we already have in Washington. So it's really, I would just encourage people to be creative with the various authorities and, look at some of these, taking the time and effort to build these kind of pipeline programs with academic institutions. I know it's a heavy lift for people to build the groundwork and everything, but the dividends that come out of it are totally worth the effort.
Thank you, Kristen. And Russell, I'm going to pose that to you as well. But before I do, I want to comment on something that Kristen mentioned that I want to encourage everyone to do. We all have access to diversity and inclusion, equity professionals in our organizations. They are so very helpful at helping us recruit in a proper way, recruit in an inclusive way. They're so helpful at helping us understand just how to speak the language and how to communicate around the organization. So I really encourage folks to include your D&I office in everything that you're doing with this, because it'll create a more diverse and robust, inclusive workforce without question. So thank you, Kristen. Russell, anything to add to this?
Yeah, so we did this a few years ago, focusing on high potentials. And honestly, it just turned into a check the box exercise. And granted, we're small enough. Our pivot was, if our supervisors are doing check-ins with their staff, they should be able to do a back of the napkin retention count. Okay. Russell just made his last tuition payment for his son at LSU. He and his wife have bought a house in Clearwater, Florida.
He's looking pretty relaxed.
Right. Or Russell he's got twins. He just started making private school tuition payments for high school. He's going to be here a while. And you have these conversations. I think if you're doing the check-ins, you can do a good back of the napkin and not just focus on high potentials. Second, look at the function of the position. So the human capital strategist, Josh Burson, just put something out this week that basically talked about, when you're looking at jobs, you need to factor in the role AI is going to play. So you got to look at, not Russell's in this position now, but if Russell's leaving, does Russell have the skill sets for 3 years down the road for this position? Okay. Does that mean if he's got it, good? If not, can we train him? If he's not open to training or is going to leave, then we need something else. And maybe the decision is, maybe I need to look and contract it, but also look at where the skill set for the position 3 years down the road. And I think the last piece, and I know it's very big in private sector, and I would say a little bit in government, are the Chicos in the decision with the secretaries and the finance people. All aspects of strategy and change management are going to impact talent and personnel. I've been in scenarios in PSC where I've been in that conversation with our DAS. And when he says, I want us to be here in 3 years, I can be like, well, then from a training standpoint, here's what our staff needs. It's a little different if the strategic plan and money's been finalized and HR hasn't been involved in that conversation, because you literally got a hand behind your back. So try to, if you're the HR person for your entity or your enterprise, get into strategic planning conversations. There's tons of data. One of the blessings of COVID is all of the think tanks put free data out there that help you. And also, if you encourage check-ins, you should be able, managers and supervisors should be able to do a back of the napkin succession plan based on the people under their span of control.
Thank you, Russell. Great stuff. I want to encourage everyone in the chat. If you do have questions, please feel free to pop those out there so we make sure that we have time for those today. And I want to go back around. I want to circle back around with all three of our panelists and ask this question. And Kristen, I'm going to start with you because this question was your idea and I love it. Something we're excited about and proud about that's happening at our agency. So what is it that you want people to know about what you all are doing that you think would be really helpful?
Well, I think I would love for everyone to take a look at our webpage and learn a little bit more about our program. I mean, besides and it makes me proud to be a civil servant, this mission that we're doing to clean up the legacy of World War II and, what really, changed the course of our history. This isn't something that we've forgotten about. And, we need creative people. We need scientists, we need technology, we need all of the above. And, there's plenty of work to do and plenty of different kinds of jobs out there. I think that, it's what I really love about my job is it's different every week, and it's very interesting, very challenging, has allowed me to meet a whole variety of people. And, we make better decisions when we have the perspectives of all of those viewpoints. Another fun trivia fact, our cleanup mission is now one of the national parks. And I think we're unique in that we are the Manhattan Project National Park, but we're in 3 different locations. So there's one location in our Washington site where there's the B reactor they built in 11 months, this engineering marvel to produce the first plutonium that was used in the bomb. So, and our second site is in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and the third site is in Los Alamos. And, so there's the historic perspective, but there's also the future perspective of, we have a role in cleaning up the environment. We have a role in helping make nuclear energy a clean and carbon-free option for our energy security. That helps our domestic security. And we're not going to be able to continue to be successful until we get some more people involved in that. And making the case for public service is one that I'm very passionate about. I think people have some misconceptions about what federal service is. And I think, all of us as federal employees can be ambassadors for what it really is and what it really isn't. Not to say that we still can't complain about the bureaucracies every now and again, but I don't think our bureaucracies are much worse than anyone else's at the end of the day. What I found inspiring when I went through the Key program was, the various missions that are out there in the government that no one knows about. And ours is certainly one of those that meets that criteria. But I also think it's a great, it's a great time to still continue to advocate for getting involved in public service, making a difference, getting up in the morning and knowing what you're doing is helping your country. So what I had wanted to highlight when we first suggested this question was our MSI program, which I already mentioned, so I won't mention it again. But again, it's just, I want to give a commercial for my program, and I'll make some materials available so you can learn more about our program. But we're all across the country if you're looking for a new challenge, I'd love to talk to you.
Absolutely. And if you're on this meeting with us today and you're not in the public service, do the right thing and join the public service. My goodness. Kara, you talked a lot about the Rapid Prototype Program. Is there anything else you wanted to highlight from your organization?
I just wanted to share that someone in the chat I saw asked about the tools and could they see them. I dropped a URL in the chat. It goes to our HR site. I do believe that the NIH Workforce Planning Toolkit is publicly available. Test it out. If it doesn't work, Patrick knows where to find me and I'll figure out how to get you the correct link that is public facing. Several agencies has reached out to the NIH to see. Oh, great. Okay. Thanks, Jennifer. I'm glad that that's available. In terms of mission, the NIAID in particular as an institute is hoping to see the first AIDS-free generation happen in our lifetimes here. And I think that just as a complement to the rapid prototyping theory and approach in the way we are delivering workforce planning services to the Institute, Kristen offered that stat of 15 people younger than 30 in her organization right now. Our average age at the NIH across all 27 ICs, last I checked, was 67. So we have a fairly similar hill to climb in terms of getting broader and getting more diversified in our representation of all segments of society. And there are some really impressive efforts happening well above my pay grade. I'm in one institute, so the NIH is above me, and they're doing some wonderful things, even in the search for Dr. Fauci's successor right now. It's really motivating to see the commitment to finding leaders who will be more representative of all segments of society. So that has nothing to do with the tools I spoke of. That's a little bit more meta, but I wanted to share that with you all too. It's, like Kristen said, once you're here at the NIH, it's really easy to get behind the mission and how compelling it is and watch a vaccine get produced in a lab in 3 months to save millions of lives and all the diseases that are being studied so that we can understand how to support the human immune response. It's fascinating. It's amazing. It's the best work I've ever seen. So anyway. Yeah,
great stuff, Kara. Thank you. Hey, Russell, what about you? And I do want to get to, there is one question in the chat I want to hit you all with, but Russell, what about you? What's your advertisement for what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So a lot of times we hear civil servants are the whipping boys and girls for whatever's going well or what's going wrong in the world. I'm proud to be at the PSC, because one of the things we do is we provide support to other agencies. So when there's a hurricane, our staff is there supporting FEMA, any state, any U.S. territory. Our team of federal occupational health is there providing clinical and wellness support. We did a podcast with our Hispanic employees on race and identity. And what I did not know was 2 of the people on the podcast actually volunteered to go work for the unaccompanied children. And they were very adamant about, I wanted these people when they were being processed or going through the process to see someone who looked like them. My favorite story is, I mentioned we have a warehouse in Perry Point, and we asked our employees, okay, what makes you proud? And we had a lady who was like, one day I got to pack the vaccinations when President Obama went to Africa. And I work every day, but on this particular day, I know my work is touching the President of the United States. And we're not telling these stories. So like Pew Research Center came out with some research that said the public's view of career civil servants, while not being as low as political appointees, is the lowest it's been in 10 years. And we have to tell more of these stories.
So I just wanted to wrap this up with one final question. I saw this from Joy in the chat. I think it's a really good one about, when you're collecting all of this data, whether all this critical information, whether it be from state interviews or exit interviews, transition interviews, she asked the question: is it stored in some sort of electronic repository? I would guess the answer to that is yes. But how is it operationalized? What is the secret to getting this data operationalized? Any thoughts about that from anyone?
Well, I'll start. So we do not make the transcripts from the transition interviews publicly available. We do review them and roll up themes and analyze them in our office. But those data really belong to the managers of those key positions and to the leaders in those organization units. And at times there are sensitive pieces of information in there. So if we do identify something that may be quite valuable to broader distribution or consideration to prompt action much more broadly in the organization, we will raise that flare up and suggest it usually from our office. But we don't have a central repository that's available to the whole institute. I'll use the word yet, because who knows in the future with rapid prototyping and in the spirit of information sharing and growth mindset and helping people learn and making opportunity for growth more widespread and more accessible to everyone, it could be something that we try in the future. Again, the thing I said earlier, sometimes you try things and it might not go perfectly, but no one got hurt, nothing burned down.
Yeah.
It's okay.
It's okay.
So, well, we don't have a perfect answer for that yet, but I hope in the future we've got better ones for how to operationalize, to use that word, that information in a more efficient and accessible way.
Well, go ahead, Russ, please.
And while not specific to exit and stay interviews, we pulse survey our staff a lot, and our pulse survey is transparent. It crowdsources. So as employees vote on the feedback, an algorithm racks and stack, we make it available. We share it with them. It's at an aggregate level, so it's not at the individual employee level, which helps. But we talk about, here's what you said. We're sharing that data. Here's our next steps, and we get this voice loop of always letting people know their feedback is sought out, and we're also going to share the data with them.
Wonderful. And do you see similar transparency, Kristen, with you all?
This isn't really my area of expertise, but I do think it's something we could definitely improve on, and just making sure that we're investing the time in helping people for succession planning, it should be a daily activity. You never know when somebody's going to have to be out of the office for 2 weeks because they got the flu. It is really a cultural kind of change. I will say that we do spend a lot of energy with our Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey results. And so while that's not the same as what Kara's laid out, I think it is a great opportunity for us to, on an annual basis, kind of reiterate and revisit where we were last year, how we're doing in comparison. And that's a good, easy way to kind of look at and take the temperature of how people are thinking about some of these same issues in a broader view.
Thank you, Kristen. Yeah, I mean, it's only data. If it's data, if we don't use it, it just remains data. So, well, I just wanted to say thank you again to all of you and to everyone that attended today. It was a really terrific crowd out there today. Thank you all for taking some of your time to learn from Kristen and from Kara and from Russell. I think the discussion was terrific, and we encourage you to attend the session here that Jennifer popped in there for Russell. That's going to be a really, really wonderful event. And thank you all for attending our final Fed Talk of the year. We'll be doing these again next year. We are looking forward to that. We'll be putting these out, and we'll try not to give you too many emails, but we definitely want to try to bring people together. In the meantime, please try to take care of each other. We've touched on a bunch of items today, a lot around resilience and human to human care. So I think when we look at it that way and look at it through the lens of humanity and the lens of connection with other people, everything can get better. So thank you all again. Thank you to our panel. Thank you, Jennifer, for being there at the NASA switchboard. And we look forward to seeing you all again down the line. Have a great day, everyone.